Hello, and welcome to the Gamer Librarian Podcast. I am your host, Adrian, and today we will discuss the Super Mario Bros. Movie, finishing up The Moon is a Harsh Mistress by Robert A. Heinlein, and catching up with The Mandalorian TV show, and more. Afterwards, follow for updates on future episodes. Thank you for joining. Now, let's start off talking about one of the biggest releases that happened this week, which is the Super Mario Bros. Movie adaptation of the video game franchise universe. For those who may not know, there has been a Mario movie in the past, somewhere around the 80s, and that movie is so special in a lot of ways because I think it's the epitome of what it really takes to get like an adaptation made in a different format, like a game to a movie, because there's so many weird nuances that you kind of have to account for. These games that are fictional, and the Mario games have, at least back then by the 80s, had almost no lore to even build up upon. I mean, they had the Mario Brothers and then the Mushroom Kingdom stuff, and then you go and defeat Bowser and save the Princess Peach and all that. But when it came to that movie, they came out with so much lore. I mean, it even started it off in like New York, Manhattan kind of area, and then you get just weird differences between the franchise itself, the Mario world, with like the weird Bomb characters. The Goombas were weird. Even the Turtles were weird. Bowser was odd. That movie itself was definitely a product of its time, right? It was one of the first ever true video game adaptations to be made, and I think the early one that came out in the 80s is special. But compared to this one, the new one that came out last week for 2023, this movie is animated, and it does so much justice to have this movie animated versus the 80s live action movie. You can do so much more with character movements and where they want to go on screen, and obviously not dealing with the pitfalls that you get with filming in live action, and they could placate that with the animation side, with things being a little more goofy and cartoony and fun in that way. And for anybody discounting the Mario movie for its cast, the cast is outright phenomenal in every true sense of the way that they could be. It's an animated movie, and I think as long as these actors that are prominent for mostly their roles, like in live action, I'm sure a lot of them have animated backgrounds to their like repertoire. I don't know about Chris Pratt per se for animation, but I know Jack Black has done animation in the past with like Kung Fu Panda and things like that. I'm sure Seth Rogen has done it before. Keegan Michael Key probably as well. And they all killed. I think every one of them killed, even Chris Pratt. Early on, when you first see Mario, he has like an Italian accent, and I think that's a little bit to placate that character. But the Chris Pratt doesn't use the Italian accent the whole movie, which is probably the biggest gripe about it. But it doesn't feel unnatural, even when Chris Pratt is talking as Mario to other characters. It doesn't feel unnatural in any way. His brother Luigi, voiced by Charlie Day, just as great. Sounds even more like Luigi than Mario would. There's the voice of Donkey Kong, which is Seth Rogen, I think is probably the most offbeat kind of voice, because I noticed Donkey Kong was Seth Rogen. Like you look at Donkey Kong and you hear the voice that's coming out from him, and oh, this sounds like Seth Rogen. It doesn't sound like a monkey, but looking at it on screen, it still works for this character. It was like, I think Seth Rogen has a more kind of confident projecting voice, which is pretty good for Donkey Kong. And I think Jack Black's voice for Bowser, his heightened ability to just already sing in his music repertoire, just made Bowser even better. Bowser is one of the only characters who does have kind of maybe musical numbers throughout the show or the movie. It's very minimal throughout it, but that was fun. I think every actor killed it. And to say that this is a poor adaptation is just wrong, because This movie has something that's similar to the '80s movie, where it starts off in like a modern day New York, Brooklyn kind of area, and it's still animated, so it looks like cartoony, and it's not more modern um, New York. And even to my surprise, this world has like cell phones and stuff. Luigi pulls out a cell phone for a small segment early on in the movie. But there is a New York in this movie, and once you get out of the New York, once you're done out of Brooklyn, and the characters get into the Mushroom Kingdom, the game, the movie is just like the games. There's so many creatures and references to the games themselves. I personally loved it when throughout the Mushroom Kingdom there was like floating platforms moving from place to place that people could use to move around. They have those yellow blocks that if you stand on them they turn blue and they fall down. They even have those, and they do some really fun scenes where the characters move side screen from like left to right for some portion of it. That was really fun, and it felt like it was a conscious movie of, well, we already have this world that's so abundant with so many things that people love from every game and spin-off, that as long as we incorporate that in a fun way, I think they probably nailed the head on that in their goal. The plot is basic. It's a basic plot. It's like kind of fish out of water with Mario and Luigi, like faux coming of age story, where they're kind of failed or prospecting plumbers. I wouldn't say failed. They're more prospecting in this version, and when they get thrust into this new world, they have to adapt differently, and that's kind of cool in that way. But the story of it focuses around Bowser trying to not really take power from the world itself or dominate. That is probably like the end goal. But his real personal goal is he just wants to have a companion. Like he's infatuated with Princess Peach, kind of like he is in the games, which is really cool because you never even get that kind of context in any of the games. I think the only game close as similar to the Mario movie is Mario Odyssey. Mario Odyssey is the same thing. He kidnaps Princess Peach in order to get her to marry her. And that was great. There's references to that even from Mario Odyssey in this new movie, which I thought was really fantastic. When I saw the trailers, I saw that there's Mario Kart references, and I was already going to see the movie anyway. But I'm a much more prominent fan of Mario Kart than I am just regular Mario games themselves. And I think everything about that movie made me feel like I was watching a Mario game. Mario goes from like the Mushroom Kingdom to meeting the Donkey Kong kind of kingdom characters. And the fight Mario has with Donkey Kong kind of early on is really cool. And their relationship is really great. They're like faux rivals, friends, kind of like Goku Piccolo kind of stuff in some regard. And I think that was a really great movie. It's probably my favorite video game adaptation, hands down. Hands down. I think it blows any live action movie out of the water, because a lot of live action video game movies kind of don't really have that same love and attention that this movie had, at least with its world building. I remember the Assassin's Creed movie being really bland because it kind of made its own universe rather than starting fresh and properly in like the one we know and love from the games and then kind of expanding that. No, it just kind of made its own thing. And if anybody ever saw the Mortal Kombat movie, the live action one that came out on HBO, that movie's good. The newer Mortal Kombat movie is really good because I think it was conscious of its fight scenes very well, and it was not all the fight scenes were really great, and I don't think a lot of the characters were super special in Mortal Kombat either. But the fight scenes, especially towards the end with Scorpion and Sub-Zero, were some of the best we've ever seen. And I do wish that movie was better. And I think that when it comes to animation, it's just so much easier to do things like action and cartoony stuff, gore with like Mortal Kombat. I know that's always difficult. Animation was definitely the way to go. Illumination killed it for this. There wasn't a single part of the movie that I thought looked bad. I think every character looks great. There's even like some really cool stuff with the characters getting like power ups and all their different costumes and things like that that you would get from that. All that looked great. Every visual on that movie was 10 out of 10. I think if anybody likes Mario in any way, or they should see the movie. It was just that fun. A lot of the references were pretty great. There's Blue Shell references. There's cameo characters from uh, more of the older games, I would say. I don't remember if certain characters appear in more modern games, but I know characters who are in like Mario 64 and Mario Sunshine and Super Mario Bros. 3 are in these movies. And that's really great. There's also references outside of Mario. Early on, there's Punch Out references and Jumpman references. Remember, know what Jumpman is? It's the original Mario, literally the original Mario. I even heard that the voice of actual Mario from the games is in this. I think he voices Mario's dad. I could be wrong, but I still think it was really great, and I want more. I absolutely want more. This movie does set up a sequel to some extent. It sets up things to move the plot along, so there become more media in the future, and I think that would be great. Um, I would love to see someone like Wario or Waluigi show up in this, because Bowser as opposition is only kind of cool, but only to the fact that he's a big monster to fight, and he's not. His only real goal is just destruction and I guess marriage and all that stuff. But I think if you had a little more personalized villain to Mario or Luigi, it could come off a little better. So hopefully that would be in the next movie with Wario or Waluigi. Um, I won't tease, or I won't say what other kind of things they tease on for a sequel, because I think you should go and see that. But there are some nods to things that could propel the Mario lore in new ways, because I know that a lot of fan theories on Mario lore uh, are out there, and maybe a movie isn't the definitive way to go about it, but I think it's fun, and I think it's a great medium to show that these beloved franchises that have been ingrained in our culture for so long. I mean, Mario is the pinnacle video game character, right? Nintendo has so many franchises that just extend the realm of video games, like Pokemon. Pokemon is a culture event. Mario is the same thing. Mario started out in arcades. Mario was first on home consoles as well, and Mario is prominent every so year with the new installments, and the spin-offs sell just as much as their mainline games. And this movie is no different. I think this movie is a testament to what could be done for proper video game adaptations. You don't need to follow the lore or the world building super hardcore, but you need to make it feel like it's a world that follows its own rules, and that the characters who live in it kind of do the same thing. As Mario and Luigi are fish out of water, they have a lot to learn in this world. In the game, you kind of just learn as you play. Obviously, you don't really know much about what Mario and Luigi know about the world. If you guys ever played the Super Mario All-Star games, the one where you play as Mario and Luigi, where it's kind of like a RPG game, like a little like Paper Mario in that regard. You go around a world map, or like set areas of this kind of openness world, and you play as either Mario and Luigi, and you can, when you battle enemies, you can choose to jump on their heads, hit them with hammers, fireballs, and stuff. And those games have tons of lore, tons and tons of lore, just based on its own villains and its caricatures. I mean, in those games, there's spin-offs where you play as Mario and Luigi hanging out with baby versions of Mario and Luigi, even like baby versions of Bowser and Peach and stuff. And there's even references to baby Mario and Luigi in the movie. Like, if you guys love that shit, you absolutely have to go see it. I saw it specifically only for the Mario Kart scenes, because that's my absolute favorite Mario game franchise of any any out there. It was really great. I hope the whole cast comes again. I I think people will probably see that Chris Pratt, probably didn't deserve as much flack as he got early on when the trailers were first coming out for Mario or when they announced the cast, right? I was skeptical too, you know, but I personally think that voice acting is a great career and needed for movies like this, but it's not super detriment, the person you have as the voice isn't the voice though, you don't see that person and they're just trying to deliver a voice that sounds natural and cohesive for like conversations and action scenes and emotion, which all does kind of, I guess, stem under acting to a degree when you're just speaking. But I still think it's great. I think that they all killed it. I hope every one of those actors come back for the next movie. If I wanted a next movie, obviously it would be Wario and Waluigi, but I would have liked to see a little more on the worlds. I you only really see mostly the Mushroom Kingdom, a little bit of like Donkey Kong's kingdom and like Bowser's stuff. You see snippets of other kingdoms, the ice ones we saw from the trailer with like the penguins, the desert, the clouds. Rainbow Road even makes an appearance to some degree, but it would have been cool to see a little bit more in that because they're all kingdoms from what I'm aware. Um, Referenced before that a character like King Babam was in the movie, so there's like a Bomb Kingdom, like faux Mario 64 kind of place. You don't really go there, and I get it. This movie's only an hour and a half long, and it didn't feel like that. To be honest, it did feel a little short, but it still kind of felt like a 2 hour movie, and the pacing was amazing from start to finish. I was enthralled by it. I was never like, oh, this is slowing me down, or it's kind of just lost its kind of momentum for me. No, it felt really great. The cuts between I would say the hero characters doing their thing, Mario, Peach, and then going to Bowser, really emphasized that Bowser is just a regular bad guy. He's just the villain, and he's literally meant to just be beaten. And Mario literally doesn't meet Bowser until mostly the very end of the movie, which kind of encompasses that. And their relationship obviously stems only from him saving Peach, which is what it should be. It's just, your princess is in another castle, go save her kind of stuff. Um, but yeah, I would see that movie again. I would see a sequel. I want sequels for this. This is probably the first video game movie that I want sequels for. And I believe it's the highest grossing animated movie of all time, at least for its opening box office for like now. And that's great. That is such great news to the point where we're absolutely going to get probably a second one, or at the very least, a newer, different Nintendo product movie. With this art style, I would say Pokemon would be like a really good bet because Pokemon's always had one true art style, and that's kind of been the same forever. They did have like a live action variant, which was kind of cool. I personally wouldn't equate Detective Pikachu, that movie, as a video game movie. It's kind of there, but I think that movie itself lost its identity to what Pokemon is with the whole talking Pikachu and the way the characters interacted with that world. I definitely think Detective Pikachu is a inferior movie to the Mario Bros. Movie. It definitely feels like the Mario Bros. Movie is much more homage to the games itself, and Detective Pikachu was just like some narrative slog. I don't even remember that many references to Detective Pikachu that I enjoyed, as a big Pokemon fan. But Mario had tons of references. Loved them all. Maybe Zelda. Zelda, I think, obviously, is probably the next best step to something that deserves animation. I know they maybe got like a cartoon in the 90s or so to some degree around like Legend of Zelda 2 or so's time frame. Metroid would be really cool, or Kirby. Kirby's always had a wonderful art style with its games. it even had a cartoon, which would be really great. Metroid deserves it. I truly think Metroid deserves it as something that's more so Nintendo's more dark, kind of gritty sci-fi worlds. You know, I think that that's something that they need to be a little more apparent on. A lot of their games are a little more kid-friendly or stuff. Zelda kind of stems across both ends of the bridge with like for kids, not for kids. If anybody saw the Sonic movies, I think the Sonic movies are also a great comparison to this, where the Sonic movies were part live action and part like CGI animation, and the big crux of that movie, or those movies being dilemmas, is they also take place in the real world, which is like faux Sonic '06 kind of stuff. And I wouldn't say that makes them inherently bad, but I think that when it came to understanding Sonic and what like the Sonic games are, the movies aren't the way to go about it. Because the movies introduce Sonic as like another fish out of water character who came from a world and is now going into the real world in his first movie. And in the second movie, he meets beings from those worlds and they try to bring him back into those worlds to some odd degree. But it never felt like uh, the Green Hill Zone area where Sonic is from and the place where Knuckles is from. It never felt like those are one big universe. In the Mario movie, it does, and that's why I think the Mario movie is a step up on those other movies. You know, it feels like it's in the world it's based off of, and they did their best to make some semblance of plot make sense. You know, I mean, without Mario, it would have just been Bowser kidnaps Peach, movie's over, right? Like that's the crux of the story. You know, if Mario and Luigi didn't go to the Mushroom Kingdom, Bowser would just overtake everything and marry Peach by the end and all that. But I really hope there's a new one in the coming years because there's a lot they could do with Mario. Mario is such a versatile kind of character and franchise. It should be a Mario Party movie. That's about it. Stay on the topic of Nintendo for a bit. I have caught up on the Pokemon Master or Pokemon Ultimate Journeys show, the American U.S. release of the U.S. dub, which is really fun. I like these shows more as an adult now because I can just appreciate them for what they are. They kind of step away from plot and narrative for a majority of the episodes in the Journeys show. Some of them do have like character development for Go or external characters to some degree. And we got a lot of cameos, which is really nice from characters from previous shows. But for me, it's mostly the battles that I like to see. I like to see cool areas uh, uh, animated in the cartoon style for Pokemon. And the Pokemon battles themselves have always been great to me. Um, and I think it goes to show that the new show for Pokemon is gonna have more of that plot centric kind of show style, which I think is greatly needed because the current run of Pokemon, where it's Ash as the main character, it it's really hard to enjoy this kind of narrative because it's just tournaments for the most part, outside of adventures and weird encounters with like the Pokemon and people who live in the world and Team Rocket, obviously. These shows kind of have the same formula. It's Team Rocket shows up for whatever reason, kidnaps Pokemon, they win, and then Ash will hang out with like his friends, and they'll go someplace to do something and catch a Pokemon. Which sometimes those activities have narrative, depending on what they're doing. But it really feels like there's never any full changes to the show or even these characters. I know Ash recently won a tournament for I think maybe the Sword and Shield runs of Pokemon. Maybe it was Sun and Moon, but sometime around there, Ash did win an actual tournament, and it just goes to show that with him still doing this current arc, his current tournament. It's just I don't really feel it anymore for him, as a character, because he made it. He did make it a while before, and now he's just kind of doing tournament with tournaments. That is kind of how the games are, at least by the end goal. Like when you get outside the badges and stuff, the uh, Elite Four champion stuff, I think should be like tournament style. Um, but the show's ending, and it has to end on some kind of note, which is going to be really sour and sweet as the bottom line. And I hope that we see Ash more in maybe the new show or spin-offs or movies or something, because Ash as a character is a true staple to Pokemon, right? Like outside the video games themselves, where probably the two most popular characters from Pokemon in the games is like Pikachu and Charizard. Ash is the frontal anime face of Pokemon. He's such an iconic character because his entire persona is being the very best at a Pokemon master, which I guess really accounts to catching a few Pokemon on top of dozens of Tauruses and only winning one tournament, which is like fine. He's still like 10 years old, I guess for some reason, but that's fine. It's still a kid's show. But I'm looking forward to see what kind of um, plot or character dynamics or tension they have in the new Pokemon show. That I think is going to be really fun, especially to see new characters with new kinds of Pokemon and new teams and stuff. We've seen a lot of the characters in the current Pokemon show with Ash, and he's used so many of the same Pokemon more recently, like Gengar, Greninja, Pikachu, obviously. He uses a lot of the same Pokemon for the most part. Changes it up sometimes, but that's only for the more recent kind of journey stuff. Go's cool. I think Go's probably one of my more favorite newer characters in terms of Pokemon. Because he has an interesting kind of perspective on the Pokemon world, where I believe when we first meet him, he wasn't that super keen on Pokemon, but then he learned to at least accept them when he met Ash, and now he just catches every Pokemon first try. Right? He throws a Pokeball, he catches the Pokemon, he can do it. He does it with almost every legendary, and that's just the Mary Sue of Go. But I hope to see him again. It's cool to see this character because he finds Pokemon that he thinks are really cool, and he just goes for them. And it's almost every character or every Pokemon. He does just toss a Pokeball and catch them. But when he sets aside the Pokemon, he goes to catch it. Ash is kind of like that. Pokemon's always been a little more slocky, like the show where if you save a Pokemon or you help it with its backstory quest for the episode, or save it from Team Rocket, and you become friends with it, right? Friendship level, you'll be able to catch the Pokemon, which is cool and everything. But it is nice to see people work for the Pokemon that they catch, and Go doesn't really do that. Even for a lot of like prominent, stronger Pokemon that you would think would be a tough fight, he does kind of just one-shot some of these Pokemon into his Pokeballs. But yeah, Pokemon is ending, and with the Mario movie being the way it is, and the new show coming out, I think it's in terms of things other than the Pokemon games, which I have gripes on, the more current ones. I think it's uphill for Pokemon. I think they're going to have a really good time if the new show can stick a really good landing early on with people, and maybe the ending to the Pokemon show doesn't burn us too bad. So, I recently finished the book The Moon is a Harsh Mistress by Robert A. Heinlein. And to start off, this is a book that I started for the first time maybe a year ago. I tried getting into a few pages into it, and it never really stuck the first time. And when I came back around to it this time, I made a goal of like, okay, I'm going to at least try and get through the first 50 pages and see if I can understand a little bit more of this. Because for me, when it comes to starting a book, even if I read the back cover and I know a lot about it or whatever, the way the book presents itself early on does kind of dictate whether or not you'll stick with it, or you'll find something to uh, stick you through it, to get further through it, like a character or some kind of topic, or maybe a foreshadowing event, something that would make you want to read more. And for me, early on, the book never really gave that to me, because the first early conversations is in the book is only really between two characters. It's the main character, Manny, and an AI named Mike. And to preface this, Manny is like the um, guy who works on the AI computer. He is like the tech guy. He is your narrator protagonist, I would say, of the book. Um, Early on, he felt like an unreliable narrator, because the book kind of had him um, give us tidbits of the lore sprinkled in between conversations with Mike. And the conversations with Mike, the AI, early on are very odd, because Mike is supposed to be like this kind of more sentient, personalized AI, much more smarter and advanced than regular computers of the world. This takes place in an alternative 2075, where humans live on the moon. I say live, they're prisoners, based on the countries that are still on Earth, Terra, uh, the U.S., Russia, China, Japan, all that. They send their criminals to the moon, and the moon individuals have like their own identity, their own society, their own kind of culture, but they're kind of indentured slaves on the moon. And the AI Mike is this being that controls a good majority of what's on the moon. There's like some internet in this world. They don't really talk about like how that works, but there is like a kind of internet. So take it as that you will. It's kind of the same as more modern times. But when Mike and Manny are talking, Mike is kind of trying to get Mike is trying to get Manny to hang out and talk more about like poems and the world and discussions. And Manny's here mostly trying to do a job. And this is where the book takes a weird turn, because it starts off with like Manny trying to fix some kind of false problem with Mike early on, and they get into the topic of like Mike being intelligent or friendly with Mike, and or friendly with Manny, and that kind of comes off as really odd, because it seems like Manny is just a regular worker, while Mike is kind of more of this prominent kind of intellectual AI person. And it's not saying Manny is dumb, but Manny is also um, I would say early on, he's kind of feels like an unreliable narrator, because he starts off talking like the events of the book have already happened, right? Like the book events happened, and he's writing about them now, and that's how we get the book. That's kind of what it feels like. Like him in the present beginning of the book already has knowledge of the events later on, and that's where I think the real divide comes from. Is that Manny is kind of an odd narrator in that sense, in that he's talking about things from the past, even though he already has like knowledge of them in the future. I don't know. It's like it's weird tone or nuance things about that always kind of set me off in the beginning. But what really gets me going in the book, what really got me hooked, was how the revolution starts on the moon, how it properly starts and begins, because that's one of the coolest aspects I've seen in this book, is the formulation and the people who start it deciding on how they're going to do the revolution. The best equivalent I can equate that to is the Star Wars TV show Andor, right? Where you see the kind of early unification, the early uh, creation of the rebel forces, which is really cool, because in Star Wars, it has to be a rebellion created by political figures of other space government, right? People opposing the Empire. That only makes sense. Obviously, it's people in the Empire even as well, but you're not getting like a full coup in the Empire during Star Wars. You don't get a full coup. However, on the Moon is Harsh Mistress, you get a hard revolution. You get people who start identifying that there's problems in the Moon society because they're oppressed by like Terra's uh, federal authority over them in terms of their production and their livelihood and all that. I talked about a good reason why the revolution kind of starts in a previous episode. And I don't want to delve into that again, but the revolution in the Moon is a Harsh Mistress really makes you think of if you were to make some like a big decision on that, what would the factors come into even formulating that? And how would you discuss bringing people into the revolution? How do you discuss uh, what actions you're taking? What kind of goals are you setting for yourself? One of the really cool kind of aspects of this is that the characters who start the revolution have such different opinions on the government, not just the current government, but how government should run, right? Um, there is an event in the book where kind of like a weird assassination, um, I guess coup attempt kind of happens where Manny's prevalent in like a auditorium showcase with like prominent figureheads of the moon, I suppose, and some tussle happens where Manny uh, saves this woman, Wyoming, who's more like Japanese kind of descent, from being taken by like I guess authorities for whatever reason. And there's like scuffles, people die, and it's difficult to determine how that even starts in that book. But it ends up being that Manny, Wyoming, come together, and Manny introduces Wyoming to Mike, and then from there they also introduce a person named Professor Bernardo, and these people have so much different ideologies on how government should be run to the point where they don't have a set goal by the end of starting this revolution. By the creation of the revolution, they don't have an idea of what the end would be, right? I think Professor is like a faux anarchist. Wyoming is more, I think, socialite, and Mike's an AI, so he doesn't really get a vote, as far as I remember. But Manny just kind of wants to have the moon be a better place, and they just want to do that in any way they can. And they start by creating the revolution by having separate cells in and of themselves. Like there's the first cell is the four people I just mentioned: Manny, Professor Bernardo, Wyoming, and Mike, the AI. That's the main cell. And then each individual is going to have their own subcells, where outside of the main cell they get a group of 3 people or so, and that's their cell. So let's say like Wyoming, who's part of the main cell, has her own cell that she structures for herself, where she brings in like 3 individuals and she governs them and what their choices are and so forth. And then those 3 go and make their own and do the same thing, and then so forth and so forth. And this kind of becomes like a safety net in case there's whistleblowers, or one of them gets like kidnapped and spills information. So that one person in one cell never really knows what's happening so much outside of the other cells of communication. Obviously, in the book, it's a little more explained in some detail. I'm not doing it justice, just on an auditory level. But I thought that was really cool, seeing the moon start its revolution early on, rather than just it becoming, or rather than it already being a thing from the get-go, and then we just kind of have to deal with it from that way. No, we see how these people dislike their lives so much that they formulate this plan to go about and freeing the moon from its captors. And if anyone hasn't read it, yeah, I truly think you should do it, because it's really good on the idea of you really don't have control in a lot of what the world gives you. And what I mean by that is that you don't have control of where you're born. you don't have control of who is in your family. And a lot of those aspects play into this book because there's people who are sent to the moon who've been on Terra, Earth for quite a long time, and now their life has to adjust to being on the moon. But then you get people who are born on the moon who've never been to Terra, who will never see Terra, most likely, outside of like the equivalent of like movie vids or book films or whatever kind of sci-fi equivalent to those media would be. You wouldn't have that. And by that point, if you're on the moon, you don't have like a good structure. The moon and the government that is on the moon is oppressive to some regard, to where you're just there to work and die. And so you can kind of sympathize with the fact that if your entire existence is just meant to survive long enough to meet quotas and send food and make money for other people, what kind of life are you living? And that's not saying that they have bad lives there. There's a big prominent uh, fact on the moon is that a lot of people there gamble. A lot of people do gamble with, I guess, whatever they have, like in terms of whatever the money currency is, or maybe like water and air rations or something like that. But people do gamble, and there's is some form of like lottery, which would like either get you into some more uh, prominent state of stability with like necessities, or maybe even get to go back to the earth and win back your freedom. They don't really delve too much into what happens when you win, quote unquote, the lottery or gambling. It might just be money and whatever you wage. But the family situations in this book is really similar as well, because um, our culture derives so much on the people like around us, where if there are people in your family doing anything wrong in any regard, that kind of affects the whole family. And the family structure in this book is confusing, wherein the fact that I think as long as anybody considers you family for whatever reason, you're family. And then in the book, they have these clans where like they have the head people of the clan who's a woman or a male, like a husband, wife kind of situation, or grandfather, grandpa kind of stuff. And then that trickles down to their kids and the people that they let in become kids, and then those people's kids. But then you could just kind of have anybody be in your family, where let's say you want to be a little more promiscuous, you can have multiple partners and they can still become family and stuff like that. That aspect of the book is confusing, but I think it does help propel the fact that when you're in a world that's so oppressed in what it is you could do as a person, the only thing you have would be family and the friends and the company that you keep around yourself. And I think Robert A. Heinlein knocked it out of the park with this book. I'm so glad I finally chose to get through more than I did the first time, and it's a book that I would read again. Um, Stranger in a Strange Land was the first one I read for him, and this is the second book. And I gotta say, 10 out of 10 for both of his novels. They really make you think with, I don't know, it's kind of cool to think about yourself in these situations. That sci-fi is big on being not just about aliens or like technology and things like that. I truly like sci-fi because it takes a lot of the real world, including our technology, our understanding of science. It takes our political interest into account. It takes our past history into account for a lot of it. And I always love looking at sci-fi through the lens of, well, this book was written in the 60s. Times are so different now in the year 2023 that to the point where the book that takes place in 2077 or 2075 still mirrors a lot of what society is just now. It still does. And I think a big point that I can make is like a lot of media before the 80s, 70s, 60s delves in the line of misogyny in terms of a lot of its characters or its character types. The character I mentioned, Wyoming, she's one of the only female characters we see in the book, and she's one of the most leading roles in the book because she gets the most time. There's other females you see, um, but they're not nearly as important to the plot as Wyoming is. But that's where the duality comes in, right? Because she is crucial to the plot. She's one of the main leading members of this revolution. But on every account, especially towards the end of the book, they almost never regard her opinions or her thoughts or her ideas into some extent, which I think always stems back to the times, obviously, but I think it does become a choice if you're going to do it in media as a choice to have your characters be represented as that. And that's good in some regard because it kind of makes the world feel a little more real because there is misogyny in the world. There is that nomenclature that women aren't as skilled in some aspects, and that's a very difficult thing to say to somebody or think about somebody because I don't think that's true about anybody. This is a fictional book which shouldn't have any kind of basis to that at all, but it does have that real world groundedness of hate and bigotry in a lot of its tones. A lot of books have that. But on the very opposite end, you could make her the main character. The main character just be a female, and the book is no different. And in history, there's clear signs of women, men, kids, all kinds of ages and nationalities and all that doing prominent, great things in the real world and in fiction. But I think that sci-fi shows us as humans that there's so much more about us than just the things that we do, and it becomes why we do them. Each sci-fi book is different. You can't say for a fact that like this is the true personification of what humanity's like and stuff. I know some books may try to like say that they know what humanity might be or humans and stuff, but we don't know what we are. We don't even know what we are as a species. We're the only species with as far as we know, like a functioning society outside of like alpha packs for animals, or hives with queen bees and things like that. I am speaking out of my ass on this whole regard, but sci-fi I think is really special. Is that it takes what we know about ourselves, humans, the things that we've been through for thousands of years, and the things that we still go through today, where climate change and the object of what is out there in space or under the ocean, our own bodies and technology, all that stuff is so unknown and mysterious to us that it will forever fuel the idea of science fiction more than horror, more than drama, more than love stories or more historical fiction, right? I think sci-fi really does encompass a lot more than just us as humans. It shows us that we had a long road getting to where we are, and by the simple fact that we can make so many stories that encompass our past that could become our future is astounding, truly. The Moon is a Harsh Mistress is a book that could take place in the 60s and still be a real thing. And 2075 is only 50 years away. 50 years. Which is absolutely crazy, because we could probably go to the moon in 10, if science works out the same way, and the Moon is a Harsh Mistress is just a couple years away. That's about it. I don't want to scare anybody with that kind of idea, but that's why I love science fiction. It shows us that humanity had a lot to learn from its past and its mistakes, and that we're forever going to be propelled into this future that's so unknown that every aspect of it is scary. Every single change from what would be our modern times or what you would probably call reality in the 60s, it could be so strange and scary. and I love it, and I'm gonna love it for the rest of my life. So I did recently also catch up on season 3 of The Mandalorian, and I'm a fan of The Mandalorian. I think it's a step in the right direction for Star Wars entirely outside of movies. I think The Mandalorian did overstay its welcome, right? Um, I don't know what their plans were from the beginning. Obviously, they maybe wanted to make this more of a grand kind of spectacle, but seasons 1 and 2 uh, felt really good at the time. And I don't know, looking back on what I've seen for season 3, I don't know if I would go back and ever watch Mandalorian. Just because the Mandalorian just feels like it's kind of absolutely is all over the place. And I only mean that in a simple regard that it focuses heavily on Din Djarin and Grogu to some extent early on. And to the point that I want to make with season 3 is that entire dynamic shifts, where the main feature of the show definitely is not Grogu or Din Djarin to the majority of the season. It's absolutely not. I would say that the real main character of season 3 is Bo-Katan, the other female Mandalorian in the show, the one whose mask, whose head face we've seen more than anybody in the show. She has so much more uh, intricate moments and character development in this season than Din Djarin has. Din Djarin doesn't really have that in this. I don't know. It's difficult to understand what Din Djarin's like goal is after the last few shows, because in season 1 it did seem like he just kind of wanted to get rid of the kid, obviously get the job done, get money, whatever. Season 2 is definitely more of like, this kid is more important than just me. I should protect him. But then when given the opportunity to give that kid the life he could have, I guess Grogu didn't want that, or Din Djarin, both of them didn't want that, so now they just kind of hang out themselves. It has been a while since I've seen the first 2 seasons of either show, but I don't know. It feels like Bo-Katan has become the absolute main character because she does a lot more in terms of the Mandalorian lore for Star Wars, not the TV show, but in terms of Star Wars in general. She seemingly is becoming the figurehead of Mandalorians just as a race, or as their little cult gang. She does get given the black saber, which encompasses her to become the leader of Mandalore to some degree, which is, always okay. I think that's really cool. But it's Din Djarin doesn't really do much in the show. That's kind of just weak for me. That's not to say that the entire season's bad. This season has some of the coolest scenes that I would say for any Star Wars show out there. A lot of the episodes in seasons 1 or 2 are really good. But what I really like specifically is, I believe it's episode 3, where we get to see this doctor who worked for like the Empire, I guess on the cloning side of it, and he starts getting involved with another previous Empire member, more on Moff Gideon's side. And I won't say who, because it ends in a pretty big betrayal. But it's one of the coolest aspects of it, because you see this guy who may actually just want to turn over a new leaf, or at least continue his work in some regard, even under the New Republic, right? But there was something truly, I think, sad about him specifically as a character getting betrayed, because it seemed like he really just did want to do a good job, or at least like propel his science in some way that was beneficial, rather than being under the boot of like the Empire. And he gets betrayed so horrendously by this other character that my heart just sank for him. right? Yeah, that doesn't really happen for a Star Wars character. I think a lot of Star Wars characters just kind of outright die for shit reasons, especially considering the movies, with the more um, beloved characters. Mandalorian characters, they're throwaway, for the most part. If you're not a main character like Mando or Grogu or a legacy character, you're throwaway. You could die this episode or by the end of the season. The other episode that I think was really cool was the most recent one, Guns for Hire, where uh, Din Djarin and Bo-Katan are investigating a string of droid kind of malfunctions, and it delves into this huge conspiracy involving separatists, which I think was really cool to go back to prequel era stuff and just bring that back for even an episode. Truly great, really, really cool because the separatists are something that's kind of get thrown away even after the prequels. You would think that after the Empire did their thing, that all the separatists would just be gone, or at least in hiding. But it seems like they're still making some moves to some degree. And I don't know, as a Star Wars fan, I'm still grateful that The Mandalorian exists. The Mandalorian may not be for me. I think it's specifically the most neutral ground you can get for any Star Wars fan. You have so much here that's just for everyone. It's not a movie, so you're not forced to get a lot. Maybe its biggest downfall is its narrative, right? We have 3 seasons of actual plot to get through. It's not something like, I think, Clone Wars, with Star Wars Clone Wars, the animated shows. You could just pick wherever in that and kind of get an understanding of where things are going, right? A lot of the episodes focus on specific characters and group dynamics. But the status quo doesn't necessarily change a whole lot in the other shows for Star Wars. Mandalorian is different. It's straight narrative from episode 1 of season 1 to wherever we are now in season 3, and it's just going to end probably the same way, in some big climactic event that may alter the world to some degree, but it really does feel like The Mandalorian doesn't change the status quo of Star Wars, at least yet. Maybe it will. Maybe Mandalorian himself will become more prominent figure in the overall Star Wars scape. But Moff Gideon is out there, so he's like the current big villain, I suppose. Season 3 is odd. It wouldn't be. I wouldn't say it's my favorite season, just because I don't remember a majority of the episodes besides the first 2 and the last one. But I don't know. Star Wars is going in some odd directions. We're getting the new Fallen Order game, right? I believe that game seems kind of fun. I wasn't a big fan of the combat for the first Fallen Order game, and I think there was just a recently put out gameplay trailer for it now, which I might have to go watch because I think it'll be good to gauge on whether or not I'm going to buy that game day one or not. I'm looking forward to the episodes of Mandalorian, though, at least. There, I think, only 2 left, at least is what Wikipedia is saying, and I don't know. The Henlein was never really a show that I was super looking forward to. I was excited for it because it was new in terms of Star Wars, but now it just kind of fizzled out for me. It was cool seeing Jack Black and I believe Lizzo in the newest episode of Mandalorian. That was really fun. I think they offered a lot of charisma and character, even though I think cameos are a little jarring. The guy from Back to the Future also plays a character in the most recent episode of Mandalorian, which is cool. I won't say who. That was really nice. And I think Star Wars has a lot more that it could use than just Mandalorian stuff. I would like to see a show get a lot more time and focus on things like maybe like crime or I guess politics. That would be kind of cool. Maybe a little more insight on the Empire. I know we're getting the Ahsoka show. I'm ecstatic for that. I think I'm going to have to finally start and read the Ahsoka book novel that was out, and then watch the Clone Wars TV show. Like that has to happen. Maybe even Rebels. I hear that it ties into Rebels, the Ahsoka show. I think she even appears in Rebels at some point, so that's something I even have to do as well. I don't think I'll watch all Rebels. I think I'd rather just die than watch all Rebels. Maybe just piecemeal parts of it. Uh, Star Wars books. I do want to get onto another book now that I finished The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. Um, I've only read a few Star Wars books here and there. I never really delve into the original trilogy kind of series stuff. I always kind of send more towards the prequels or early on. I tried reading Heir to the Empire. That first book was really good. I didn't read the other two yet. I should get on that. But I think the next book I will start might be Star Wars X-Wing Rogue Squadron, because that's been a book that's been on my list for a while. It's a piece of Star Wars that I never really super got into. I know there's games for it, like on the GameCube and stuff like that. But I think even Wedge as a character shows up later on in some Star Wars media. But the X-Wing series is something that I've never really given a full shot, because I'm obviously more of a clone kind of guy. Jedi's are always cool to some degree. But yeah, I think I'll definitely read this book coming up next. And I'm not really sure what we're going to be doing throughout the week. I don't think any more games are coming out, which is kind of sad. And then there's the D&D movie I like to go and watch. Yeah, that's really just about it. Just gonna try and read Star Wars. Maybe I can talk to you guys about that next episode. This has been episode 5 of the Gamer Librarian podcast. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, Amazon, DZ, and Podcast Junkies. Be sure to follow for updates on future episode releases. Thank you, and see you next time.